Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. And was that one of the craziest weeks in the history of college football as far as a week-to-week basis? It has to have been one of the wildest finishes I have ever seen. I mean, we have multiple top 5 teams losing, multiple top 15 teams losing, multiple top 25 teams losing. And almost all of them, all except for one, came to unranked opponents, including one that was in the SEC. It was probably one of the most unbelievable results I've ever seen. Vanderbilt beats Alabama, unheard of. If you had told me before that day started that Alabama had a shot to lose that game, I would have laughed in your face. But we'll talk about that right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. They weren't the only one stunned in the SEC. Tennessee falls. Meanwhile, Georgia handles business. Ohio State handles business. Lots of fantastic matchups. We'll get into all of that right here on the Week 6 reaction show of the College Football Overtime Podcast. Before we do any of that, though, got to welcome in my co-host, Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. Yeah, I think I saw it's the first time since Pedro Martinez tackled Don Zimmer back in 2003 that you had 5 of the top 11 teams lose. And so it
Wow.
has been 20-plus years since we've seen a week quite like this one.
It's an unprecedented week, an incredible week indeed, and one that will be remembered for a very long time because I distinctly remember people talking about it being a sleepy weekend, not a lot of big matchups, all looking ahead to next weekend. Nope, not the case. That's generally, that's how it works. That's what we called it. What is it? What was the name that you had for it?
I just called it a watch-out weekend.
A watch-out weekend? Well, watch-out weekend indeed. Lots of top 15 teams falling in this one, and not a great weekend to go apple picking. I know some people talked about that very fact, but tough weekend for that indeed. Headlined, obviously, by this result. Alabama stunned by Vanderbilt, 40-35 up there in Nashville, Tennessee. And this is a historic win for Vanderbilt. And if anybody of you, anyone out there who's listening, watching, however you're getting your podcast, did you see everything that was going on Twitter about these goalposts that were making their way down Broadway? It was about a 56-minute walk from the stadium into the Cumberland River where the goalposts ended up finding themselves. And there's just this posse, this horde of Vanderbilt students taking these goalposts from point A to point B. And I think they were just running around in large groups and no one really had a plan. They just sort of figured they'd figure something out. And now they've since retrieved everything from the Cumberland River, and now all of that stuff is being used for donations and everything else. And they're going to chop it up and sell it off. But honestly, one of the most incredible football games, one of the most unbelievable responses I've seen on social media. Look, Alabama is the godfather of the SEC. They just are. That's just how it is. Vanderbilt, the antithesis of that. They're probably the cellar dweller. They are the bottom of the totem pole. But if I told you that the Commodores controlled this game from start to finish, that's pretty much what happened. Just an unbelievable result there. 13-0 at one point. It was 23-7 at one point. It was 40-28. They held the ball for a whopping 42 minutes in this game. 12 of 18 on third down. There were a couple moments where I felt like Alabama was like, all right, like, here we go. They're about to come back into this game. Ryan Williams scored that crazy touchdown, and which just seems to be commonplace at this point that we're destined to have a Ryan Williams acrobatic catch. But they cut the lead down to 30-28. But then Vanderbilt just stays steady, scores 10 straight points after that, and they go away and they get this win. So unbelievable game from Vanderbilt.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I don't want to undersell the impact of the upset, but I don't want to oversell it either. This is like not the biggest upset in SEC history. And I'm not suggesting you said that, but let's just be realistic about what it was. They were 22, 23-point underdogs. And going by the name of the programs, I understand it. But I also think we have to give Vanderbilt credit for what they've been doing, not just this Saturday, but over the course of this season. I mean, I know they went into Georgia State a couple of weeks ago. They lost a tight one there. They beat Virginia Tech to open the season. They put Missouri on the road to the brink. If the end game for Missouri goes differently, or are we really sitting here with a subtitle that says "stunned by Vanderbilt"? I mean, if they potentially could have knocked off 2 top 10 opponents if a slight change of how that Missouri game ends. So I understand the premise behind it here. But let's also not pretend that this was some miracle victory. Vanderbilt took it to Alabama. This was not like a series. Yeah, this was not a series of like ball bounced weird and it just kind of happened, right? Like Vanderbilt came out on the first drive and took a lead, and they continued it throughout the rest of the game. And every time Alabama started to creep back into it, every time Alabama had an answer, Vandy would do something to respond. So it was not this like crazy chaotic. Like if you had taken the names off the jerseys, if you would switch jerseys, you would have said just the same way. Like, man, Alabama got out of there with a 40-35 win, but the game was not as close as the score. It was kind of Alabama with the kind of weird fluke plays to keep in this game. The Ryan Williams that you mentioned, which I mean, it is a fluke, but it's also because we've seen it from him.
What more can you say about him, though?
Yeah, it's also not a fluke. It's just kind of Ryan Williams.
When you do it that many times successfully, it's not a fluke anymore.
But you know what I'm talking about. And
I know
so
what you mean.
It's just one of these
Anybody
things
else?
where I don't. It's weird because it's obviously such a massive upset because of what Alabama, the program, has been, because of what Vanderbilt, the program, has been. But I also think you have to give credit to Vanderbilt in what they have and are this year. And that is that they are not the pushover that they have been in recent years. And so it was weird to watch this game when I'm sitting there and I'm talking to myself and I'm saying, this Vanderbilt team's not that bad. Like they're not great. They obviously shouldn't be beating Alabama. I think we all understand that. And Alabama's got a couple of different aspects that they're playing with, right? They're coming off that emotional game with Georgia. This is a very clear letdown situation. No one's overly surprised by it. But normally in these letdown situations, they still find a way to win. Georgia would still find a way to win. Texas, I mean, these teams find ways to win these games. Alabama just simply didn't do it. It was incredible to watch because I was with you. There were moments in this game where you're like, you just feel like they're going to grab control. You just felt like there were moments.
You're waiting on it.
When they got it to, I think it was 23-21, you're like, okay, take a breath, get a stop, take the
30
lead.
to 28. 30 to 28.
Is that what it was? Okay. Yeah, you're like, take a breath, get a stop, and you can ride this thing out. It just didn't happen. And when Vandy came around the end and hit Jalen Milroe and he dropped the ball where he was sacked, and you're like, my goodness, they're actually going to do this thing. Pretty stunning. But I mean, it sets you up for a pretty crazy rest of the day into the early evening. But this was the one that's going to draw the headlines for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, and it's not that it was that Vanderbilt's such a bad team this year, because they're not. They're really not. You have the new additions that they've made, like specifically Diego Pavia has been tremendous for them. He's kept them in a lot of football games. They should have won that game against Missouri, and that was a good pull from you. I mean, look, you're in a situation where this squad, if Brock Taylor doesn't miss those 2 field goals in double overtime, then we're talking about this team in a completely different light, potentially. I mean, that's just the way it is. That would be 2 top 10 wins plus a win against Vanderbilt or Virginia Tech for Vanderbilt. I mean, that loss to Georgia State seems more and more like the outlier than it is the real declaration of who this team is. But I mean, Diego Pavia, when he outduels Jalen Milroe, a potential Heisman Trophy front runner, that's incredible. I mean, he had an unbelievable game. Cedric Alexander ran for 2 scores in this one. It's just crazy. It's crazy for Vanderbilt. It's an awesome result for them. And I know you say it's not because of the teams on the field necessarily, but it's as much that as it is what these 2 teams represent. And it's just that feeling of just college football personified is the result of this game. Really.
Yeah, I
But
just
what's
want to
next?
say, like, the thing that I want to caution people on is going like well beyond what this upset was. Vanderbilt was a 22.5 point underdog, right? Like
Yeah.
in comparison, Auburn was a 21.5 point underdog. Like that Auburn, if Auburn, and I know you're dealing with home fields and stuff like that, but like it would have been a similar upset if Auburn had walked into Georgia and won that game. Now I know appearances are way different, but I also just want
Mhm.
to respect what Vanderbilt is, and we can't just sit here and be unfair to the players and say it's the biggest upset in college football history and SEC history, stuff like
Not college football
no, I
history.
know,
No, I
but
know. I
not
wouldn't
even
say that either.
SEC. Like realistically, and I don't have anything at the top of my head, but like not even SEC history. In terms of like statistical point spreads. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just it's a fun result, and it was an extremely unexpected result that really catapulted the second half of the day.
yeah.
I mean, it was just it was like, hey, this is a teaser, and this isn't even the last thing. But last thing I will say on this, and I'm going to ask you this question: what's next for Alabama? How do they recover from this? You go from the win, you dominate Wisconsin, then you dominate Georgia in the first half, and then they come storming all the way back. Is this and I'm asking this almost rhetorically, it's not even a take necessarily. Y You do everything right in that first half, and then almost seemingly you do everything wrong, and you're saved by this miracle at the very end of the game against Georgia. We talk a lot about in sports specifically, and specifically in football, about how teams sometimes when they turn it off, it's hard to turn back on. I understand you have a full week off and everything changes there and things change from week to week. I wonder if the button just sort of stayed off after that second half against Georgia.
No, I completely think that's missing the mark.
Okay.
I think
It's a thought that's been
well,
circulating
and
my
let
head.
me work my way through that because I don't mind the question, but I think when you turn something off like Alabama potentially did against Georgia, I think it only I think when you talk yourself into is it tough to turn it back on? I think we're talking about that day, that night when you've taken your foot
I
off the
agree.
gas. I do not think it
Yeah.
carries over. And so to answer your question, like directly, no, I don't think it's a carryover from that. Now, do I think it's a hangover a little bit? Do I think that there are emotions that are maybe tough to build back into it? Yes, and I think it's not a hangover necessarily, but to an extent, you got to feel a certain way to provide your best, right?
Yeah.
It's no secret that for a long time, Vanderbilt has been a tough place to play because there's no energy in that building. And
It's
the
true.
team has also not been able to match talent. But if Alabama comes in there with no energy and faces a Vanderbilt team that is closer to matching talent than they have been in years past, I think that's what you see yesterday. I think they were flat, not because they turned it off against Georgia or anything like that. They just probably didn't take it seriously. They overlooked their opponent. And quite frankly, they just didn't get their competitive juices going until it was too late.
Yeah. And that's just one of the killers in college football. You have, especially in the SEC, like on a week to week basis, you have a lot of very competent opponents. And speaking of that, we have another game here in the SEC. Tennessee stunned, I can use that adjective again, by Arkansas in a game that I had Arkansas having a puncher's chance in this game, but it didn't unravel in the way that I expected it to. It was actually the antithesis of what I expected. I expected a high scoring game, not this low scoring game that we ended up seeing 19-14 winners, Tennessee or Arkansas over Tennessee. But paired with that loss by Alabama, it marks the first time two top five teams from the same conference lost on the same regular season weekend since October 6th, 2012. And it's the first time that two top five teams did it to unranked opponents since 2004. These kinds of things don't happen very often, especially two teams who are as well regarded as Tennessee and Alabama. But let's move our focus here specifically to what we saw from Tennessee. The offense was lackluster. It was not good enough. We knew that Arkansas had a pretty stout rush defense, but that secondary had been exploited time and again. I had a thought yesterday just with Nico Iamaleava looking like a freshman. And it's not that he was inefficient or made mistakes or anything like that. It's the fact that the ball wasn't put in his hands. He wasn't given an opportunity to win this game. They put the ball in Dylan Sampson's hands and said, hey, Dylan Sampson, go get us a win. And it looked like it was going to work. I mean, the Hogs led 3-0 at halftime, which is not the result that I was expecting through the midway mark. But look, Tennessee scores 14 unanswered points, led by Dylan Sampson. It seemed like that was going to be the catalyst that was going to propel them to a win. I said, oh, well, all well and good for Arkansas. Good for you guys. But then they came storming right back. They scored 16 unanswered points to win this game. And they did it without Taylon Green on that final drive. Malachi Singleton, pride of Kennesaw, North Cobb High School. He came in and both quarterbacks ended up having pretty strong days. I mean, Taylon Green goes 266 here in this one before leaving the game, but Malachi Singleton only had that final drive. But he completes 2 of his 3 passes, 31 yards, runs the ball pretty effectively, and then he scores the go-ahead touchdown. But Jaquindon Jackson, he was strong, and 57 yards doesn't look great on paper, but against a stout Tennessee defense that pretty much dominated throughout the course of this game, that's pretty solid. That's fine. But he scores that touchdown, and Andrew Armstrong on the outside, he was also pretty good in this game. But look, Tennessee, I need to see more. I can't believe I'm saying this either. I need to see more from that offense in these types of situations. That's 2 games in a row where they've been kind of held in check. Oklahoma, a little bit more stout of a defense than Arkansas, but this is 2 weeks in a row that we've seen this.
Yeah, it's coaching malpractice, and you got to shine the spotlight on the coach, not the quarterback, in my opinion. I think Nico looked like a freshman on one play and one play only, and that was the final play of the game where he didn't know the clock, and he ran out of bounds, and he didn't give his team an opportunity for a final toss into the end zone. That was the only time I was like, that's a freshman move in that manner. Look, you had one ball that was completed beyond 20 yards in this game. That's not enough. That's not aggressive enough. And this is not the sort of offense that needs to work its way up the field in the pass game. It's the sort of offense that needs to be hitting big plays. Now, maybe he felt they couldn't protect Nico to allow routes to get down the field, right? I mean, Arkansas did have 4 sacks throughout the course of the game. Maybe that was part of it, but you got to open up the playbook for Nico and let him do what he's talented enough to do. I think by putting a leash on him, having quick throws, short routes, stuff like that. Look, you can name any team you want, Garrett, in the top 10. I'll tell you, they're not winning a national championship without big play ability. And it just felt like the big play ability was neutered in this one by the play calling, not by the quarterback, but by the play calling. And so it's crazy. Like, you were all on me about Arkansas, and we both kind of settled on the agreement that, like, yeah, maybe their offense under Taylon Green could get off, and maybe they can threaten Tennessee. I didn't feel like it's a great matchup in a high-scoring game because I thought Tennessee could score too. And so you were on it with Arkansas threatening Tennessee in this one, but neither of us had it anywhere close to how they would win this game. Holding what's supposed to be a powerful Vols offense to 2 touchdowns, only allowing them to score in 1 quarter, shutting them out through halftime, stuff like that. Very impressive performance by Arkansas in this one. And again, you just have to ask questions about the play calling for Tennessee. They've got to be taking shots down the field. When we get to Georgia, we'll be talking about this exact same thing. These teams have to take shots downfield, and with the exception of 1 deep ball completed to Dante Thornton, Tennessee really didn't do that.
Yeah, and look, and I'm fine if you're not explosive, if you dominate possession and you run away with that avenue, but this is a game where you're out. The Arkansas held the ball longer, I think a full 10, 11 minutes longer than Tennessee did. And if you're not going to be explosive, then you need to do that. Like, that's just what it is. And you failed twice on 4th down. You're sub 50% on 3rd down. And those are recipes for upsets. And it's not even like you turned around and turned the ball over a whole bunch, because you didn't turn it over at all.
Right.
Like, that's the craziest thing. This was a really clean game for the most part. It's just ineffective offense, and that's not the way that I would be discussing this game, but I do want to highlight the fact that Tennessee's defense, they might be for real. Like, this is a group that I was a little bit critical of, just in the sense that they haven't been tested by any legitimate offenses yet. And Arkansas, for all of their shortcomings and how many they turn the ball over a lot, and they sometimes they look undisciplined and they play lackluster defense at times. Arkansas didn't do any of those things here in this game, but Tennessee held that offense in check. Like, this is a team with a very clear identity on offense, and Tennessee dominated it. I mean, you hold any team to 3 points in the first half. That's a really, really good performance. And 19 points in general in college football is a very strong performance. It's not necessarily elite, but it's strong. Especially since the final touchdown of the game, you could make the argument that they gave it intentionally, that they intentionally let them score.
And that's what I was going to say. And there's another game we'll talk about later where late game decision making baffles me a little bit. Tennessee should have let Arkansas score one play earlier. It's very clear to me that they're down to the Tennessee 11-yard line they're in field goal range. Like they're just in field goal range or earlier. You have to score. Like a field goal would have beaten you. Like you should have let them score. Like, I mean, maybe you could have tried to hold on for a missed field goal, I guess, but they get down to the 22-yard line before the 2-minute timeout. And it's at that point that's when you should have scored. You should have let them score. You instead let two more plays come off. You don't let them score till 1:17. And then based on what we saw at the end of the game with Nico running out of time there with the final play with 6 seconds left, you probably should have had 45 more seconds. And so I get this idea of like, you don't want to give up. You want to keep fighting. But like, I feel like the better way to fight in that one is to let them score and not theoretically hold them to a 37-yard field goal.
Yeah. And last point here, Sam Pittman, man, I've never met somebody who has any negative things to say about Sam Pittman. He's a very well-liked person. It was also a little surprising that he kept his job at the end of last season. I think he was a very popular candidate for hot seat rankings and discussions like that. Sam Pittman needed this game. Sam Pittman, Arkansas looked like a better football team this season through this point of the year. And now going into a bye week, they can hit the reset button and kind of rest up and recalibrate for the rest of the season. But it's a lot easier when you're coming off of a win over a top 5 opponent. You did it at home in front of the crowd, the home crowd, and they got to rush the field. Vibes in Fayetteville, Arkansas are very high. And Sam Pittman is the person who needed this game because the results, they just hadn't been coming yet. You know, I mean, like, this is a team that just lost to Texas A&M in a stinker of a game. Yes, you beat Auburn, but that was kind of a game that I don't know if anybody really felt like they won that game. You know, they needed this one really badly, and Sam Pittman in particular. I know Tennessee is going to get a lot of the lumps here, and they deserve it. They deserve it because they should have gone out and rolled this game. They absolutely they should have. And they left the door back open for Arkansas to come back into it. But good for Sam Pittman. Really. It's good for Sam Pittman. Any more thoughts on this one before I move on?
No, I just look, Tennessee was kind of lucky to be in this game to begin with. Arkansas missed so many chances early in this game to put it away in the first
that's
half.
Actually a good point too.
It went 3-0 at halftime. I texted you midway through. I was like, it feels like it should be 17-0. 3-0 puts Tennessee in this game, and we ultimately saw Tennessee come back in the second half and take a lead. Arkansas pulled ahead in the end, but it was just it. You mentioned it was a relatively clean game in terms of turnovers, but there were still a lot of points left on the board for the Razorbacks.
I wanted to mention that, like, as far as turnovers and penalties, there were penalties. Like, Tennessee had 10 penalties, but it was 60 yards. Most of them were procedural penalties, little things like that, which you got to clean up, obviously. But ultimately, like, Arkansas. That's why it felt like this was a game that was going to slip away from them at the very end. But credit to the Hogs, man. They get the result over there in Fayetteville. But moving back over to the ACC, way out west for an ACC matchup at Cal. The Miami Hurricanes, man, These guys have a thing for the dramatics, and they have a knack for them too. Pretty good at it. 2
Yeah, they
weeks
got the
in a
league
row.
office on their payroll while they're at it.
It's 2 weeks in a row that Cam Ward and Miami have stormed back to win a game. 21 points in the fourth quarter, and the Canes rallied to the win. Their biggest fourth quarter comeback since 1999. And Cam Ward, look, the dude just continues to stamp his name as a Heisman hopeful, and he's done nothing to prove otherwise. 4 straight touchdown drives after trailing 35-10 in the third quarter. And that's about where I was able to tune into this game. For anybody who's not aware, I cover the Jackets for 24/7 Sports. I'm over there on the flats. I'm following all of these games and watching on my phone and trying to do everything all at once. And this is one that I started saying, like, 5 teams have now lost. Cal has a chance to do the funniest thing possible. And it looked like they were going to do it. 35-10 in the third quarter. That's where I turned this game on. And from that point, Cam Ward produces 277 yards of offense. From that point, Abe, not in the game. I mean, in the fourth quarter. That's the most for any player in the last 7 years. He now leads the nation in passing yards with 2,300. He touchdown passes with 20. It's his first season over there in Miami, but he looks like an absolute veteran. He has complete control of this offense, complete control of this team. But I do also want to give flowers to one more person, Xavier Restrepo. He's the guy who is not mentioned nearly enough for Miami. It feels like whenever this team needs a big play, Cam Ward's making it with his legs, or it's Xavier Restrepo making it with his hands. And he goes, I think it was like 75-yard touchdown, or not touchdown, but it was like a catch and run. And he's just a big play machine. He comes up in the biggest moments when they need him most. But it's a heartbreaker for Cal. But look, Miami feels like a team of destiny right now. And maybe to a point that I know that you're about to make about this game, sometimes it seems like they have a big brother on their side.
Yeah, I mean, look, credit to them for, I guess, putting themselves in position. But, like, this is the second week in a row where they've had a game handed directly to them by the Zebras. And in this instance, it was twice, right? I mean, a week ago, it's a Hail Mary that I guess they found evidence to overturn. This week, there's a very clear targeting. There's no doubt about it. It's helmet to helmet. There's a launching, it's crown of the head that needs to be called, and they overturn that. And then, quite frankly, if we're going to nitpick with the officials, there's a very clear and eligible receiver downfield on the touchdown that puts Miami ahead after the fact. And so it's just like, yeah, like again, I don't want to dump on the players, the team, the coach, whatever. But you have to ask yourself some very real questions about why this team is still undefeated when, quite frankly, if it's not Miami, if it was, let's say, UVA in the same situations, they're probably got 2 losses. And so, look, it's tough to prove some sort of conspiracy theory that the league office is really behind this. I understand that. And I'm not suggesting they are. What I'm suggesting is that the officials have screwed up independently twice in benefit of Miami in situations that would have cost them, in my opinion, certainly a week ago, 100% an absolute loss. And it's my opinion that the targeting should have been called. It should have been penalized, and Miami never gets the ball back. That's just the reality of the situation. So, look, I'm just, how do you not play the rest of the season with an asterisk? You keep winning games and hope people forget. But yeah, look, Miami is a top 10 team. A lot of other top 10 teams went down this weekend. We're going to talk about a couple more as we go, I know. So it's nice for them to still have that 0 next to their name, but just doesn't feel like they've necessarily earned it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you go up and down this win-loss record. And I know that Miami's going to get a lot of hype and love and everything just because they're Miami, and I feel like there's a lot of brand bias when it comes to the Miami Hurricanes. They're the closest thing we have to the Dallas Cowboys, I'd say, in college football, a team that really hasn't accomplished a whole lot over the last couple of years, but I don't know. They've got a national fan base for various reasons. But you look at this schedule, and I'm not piling on these players or anything like that either. I'm not hating on Miami either, but I'm just trying to point out there is a little level of uh, bias towards them in some capacity, right? Even though they haven't really delivered on a lot of the hype over the last, I don't know, 20 years or so. But you look at the record, you have the road win against Florida, which is not objectively that impressive of a win. You then go and beat Florida A&M at home, Ball State at home, South Florida on the road, in a game where you were not very effective in this game until the second half. And then now you're back against conference opponents, against Power 4 opponents. And in consecutive weeks, you look downright dreadful. Not even just sort of good. And you rely on Cam Ward to pull the rabbit out of a hat. And I don't know how much longer you're going to be able to do that. That's a very realistic thought in this. And I know you say like, just win the rest of your games and figure it out. The rest will figure itself out, right? You're going into a hornet's nest next week against a Louisville team that's lost 2 games in a row. They're reeling a bit right now, but they're in desperation mode. Now, actually, it's in 2 weeks because they have the bye week this week. But this is the Louisville team that's going to need a positive result. They need a win in this game very badly. Then it's Florida State, a team that they'll get up for that game. Duke, I think Duke has shown that they're actually a pretty solid football team. 5-1 to start the year. A road game to Georgia Tech. That's not a game that's a game you lost last year. That's a game that you lost in embarrassing fashion last year. You probably had that game circled, but they're not just going to bend over and take it. But it's Wake Forest. Then you're at Syracuse. There's no real big game. You have the theme that I'm trying to lay down, but I'm not fully convinced based off of the last 2 results that I've seen in ACC play that they're this juggernaut that they're being claimed, that people are claiming that they are. They have a really exciting and compelling quarterback. He's really damn good. But Abe, we talked about this at the beginning of the year before the season started. He did this at Washington State. He plays really, really well for the first half of the season and then just disappeared in the second half of the year. What if we see that again from Miami? I think it's a very realistic thought here for the Hurricanes.
Well, I think you go back into it. I don't necessarily agree that that's realistic, only because I think when you looked at what he did in the Pac-12 and then who he faced in the Pac-12, there was a severe step up in competition.
There's context to every,
I don't know if there's a severe step up here. You mentioned Louisville. I know Duke looks okay, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, but these are just teams that are okay. And quite frankly, like Syracuse is an offensive-based team. Louisville, I would say, for the most part, is more an offensive-based team. So, like, it's not like they're going to walk in there and face some juggernaut defense that's going to shut them down. So, I get what you're saying. To me, it's just tough to look at them legitimately and say that they're undefeated. Like they've had 2 games directly handed to them. And I don't care what Miami fans want to, leave in the comments, ugly words. Like, there's just no way around it. Like, there's just no way around it. Like, even if you want to make the argument for this one, like, there's certainly no way around it last week. Like, that has to be a loss. Again, that has to be targeting Saturday night. And I don't think Cal ever punts the ball back to Miami. That's a loss. And so that's how I feel about it. But offensively, because this is out of their control, offensively, Cam Ward, Restrepo, they have put this team on their backs, and it was fun to watch the comeback, even despite the officials ruining it once again.
It was a really fun game. It was a really fun game.
I would say this.
At that point, I was cheering for chaos.
Yeah, and I will say this. It's fun to watch, but if you continue to put yourselves in that hole, there will be a time or two where you don't find your way out of it.
That was my point.
It's not even a talent thing. That's just how it breaks.
And then the thing is, if you don't climb out of it, then where's your marquee win? There isn't one. You're going to likely finish the season without a single ranked victory.
This is a team that can probably afford one loss. I think a 2-loss Miami team is probably not in the playoffs. They can afford one loss.
It could be one loss.
Maybe that second loss would be like to a 1-loss Clemson in the ACC title game.
You cannot lose. The more I look at this schedule, the more I say to myself, they have to have one loss. They have to be compelling. If they keep winning these little tight games, they need a big win here soon. Because if they lose one down the stretch and then they lose the ACC championship to a team that I think is just a better football team in Clemson, then I'm not having them. They may not be in for me. I don't know because there's no good win. I don't have a single good. I can't look at any of this, and of course, I'm looking ahead and not looking back. I don't have the benefit of foresight here, but I don't know if there's like that marquee win, and that might end up coming back to bite them a little bit. I need to start seeing some better results here from the Miami Hurricanes. And look, you stay alive, and if as long as you stay unblemished, you're gonna have an opportunity to compete in the college football playoff. So none of this matters if you continue to win. I'm speculating, as are you, that they might lose a game down the stretch because you're not going to be able to pull the rabbit out of the hat every single week. It's not how it works. College football eventually will come up and bite you. But we'll see. We'll see. I think it makes for some interesting matchups here down the stretch. But they're definitely a team to follow. They stay undefeated. They move up in the AP poll. We'll get to that here on the College Football Overtime podcast. But since we're coming up right about to the midway point, while we are here, why don't you like the podcast? Follow along, subscribe, do what you got to do there, and make sure that we keep doing this every single week. We do it twice a week. Monday, it comes out on Monday, and then it comes out on Friday as well. So make sure that you are following along all season long. Happens twice a week. Like, subscribe, follow along. Abe Gordon and Garrett Chapman here on the College Football Overtime podcast. But not all of these games were tight. You know, there was one game that, yikes, bit of a blowout. And it was domination from the very start. Connor Wegman gets the start here for Texas A&M in a decision that I texted you as soon as I saw it. I was like, oh my God, that might be a mistake. Maybe not. They lead 10-0 at the end of the first quarter, 24-0 at halftime, and it was 34-0 before Missouri scored their first touchdown. This was an annihilation. This was an obliteration. They ran the ball down their throats, and then they turned around and did it again. 236 yards on the ground. Le'Veon Moss was a beast in this game. 138 yards for him, 3 tutties. Amari Daniels finishes the day with 2 touchdowns as well. And Connor Wegman was efficient. He was effective, and he was everything he hadn't been before the injury. And the thing is, if you have the rushing attack working like this behind him, you don't need the running quarterback in order to find positive results there. I thought that was the differentiator that Marcel Reed had, that Connor Wegman didn't. But Connor Wegman's he's a pretty good athlete, but he showed that, look, just drop back and complete the passes that you need to stay ahead of the chains. Let the guys behind work, and that's really what they were able to do, and they dominate Missouri.
Yeah, it got to a point of domination, but they were helped along the way. And I hate to bring the officials back into it, but this game should have looked a lot different early on. Again, I don't know early on Missouri's first drive how it's not pass interference. They called it pass interference on the field and then held a discussion, overturned it. It was nonsense. It's a terrible call. Missouri probably scores a touchdown, but if not, at least they're in field goal range already. So that already changes the game. And then later, a couple drives later, Luther Burden, when this game was 7-0, when this game was 10-0, I apologize. Brady Cook hits Luther Burden for 75-yard touchdown, and they give an eligible receiver downfield on the other side of the play, nowhere near anything, something we didn't see given in that Miami game. And it just, again, if that is called differently, and you could have called it, I have no problem with that, but there's also an opportunity to not call it. See the Miami game. So it could have gone differently. When it didn't, though, and here's what's troubling for Missouri, Garrett, because I was watching this game, and I was watching Luther Burden, and I was watching Brady Cook, and you saw the reaction. Maybe not as much on the missed PI early on, but after they called back that pass interference, they were disconnected from the game at that point. And it just didn't feel like Missouri was still in it mentally. And that's when you see, because it was still 10-0 at that time. That's when you see Texas A&M really start to pour it on. 17-0, 24-0 at half, 31-0 out of half. And at that point, it was away from them. But it was in that moment where you're just like, you guys are still in this game. It's 10-0. Like if you can dial it back in, they mentally couldn't get back into it, and it started to bubble away from them. And then it became blowout city. This was an odd game early on that felt like it was going to be a battle. It felt like it was going to be competitive. It didn't feel like Missouri necessarily would have won the game. I'm not suggesting that, by the way. Texas A&M was fighting, but they did get some help early, and Missouri felt disconnected. And then you and I had talked about this. I would have gone with Marcel Reed. They do bring Connor Wegman back and kept him relatively safe with smart passes. 18-22, didn't throw a touchdown, but as you mentioned, 5 on the ground. Was very efficient, was very smart with his passing. And so maybe we buried Connor Wegman a little bit too soon. He was actually very good in this game for Texas A&M.
Yeah, he was. And I'm looking ahead for Texas A&M. And I know you can, I've now done this a few in a row, but I don't
after Alabama just lost to Vanderbilt, we really looking ahead and trying to project. Is that what you're telling me?
But that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again.
Yeah.
But you look down the slate for Texas A&M. Now they're going to the bye week. Then they get Mississippi State, LSU, South Carolina, New Mexico State, Auburn, and Texas. They go on a roll. Hey, we're looking at a playoff team.
Well, look, it just, maybe you were going to talk about the rankings earlier, maybe not, but like on the heels of this win, Garrett, like they're at 15 right now. They jumped up 10 spots in the rankings. And I know a lot of that's because of teams that obviously fell out.
Sure.
They jumped up 10 spot in the rankings. They're at 15. And so, yeah. And obviously if they were to lose at the end of the year to Texas, that's going to cost them a few spots, but LSU presumably may still be ranked when they play them. That would be big for them. And Auburn and South Carolina, you probably can handle those. Both of those are road games though. And so we know it can get weird, but I don't disagree with you. Not one bit on that comment.
Yeah. That's why I say that.
I mean, they're leading the SEC, right? They are the only team I know, but like just for whatever it is, they're 3-0 in the SEC. Texas and LSU are both 1-0. I mean, that's where they are.
And look, their one loss this year is going to come from a week 1. That's the best time to lose. Right. Really? I mean, you lose week 1 and win your next 11 games. That means your Texas A&M is playing in an SEC championship game. That means that Texas A&M is probably a top 5 team in the country. Most teams who win 11 games in a row, they're ranked pretty high.
I mean, play this out. Like, there's definitely a world. Let's say they beat Mississippi State, South Carolina, New Mexico State, Auburn. That game against
they should win all 4 of those.
That game is against LSU on October 26th, end of this month. It's going to be a home game for Texas A&M. If they can win that game and run through the rest of their schedule, they are undefeated in conference heading into that season finale with Texas. And even there's probably a decent chance that they could lose that game and still make the SEC championship game and potentially rematch with Texas. Who knows what Texas has done between now and then? Like, there's a real chance that if they do what they can do, even with a loss to Texas, they might be in the SEC title game.
They might. And I think we're coming to the time where Texas A&M needs to be taken seriously. We're past that time.
I'm not going to lie. I want to see it one more time from Connor Wegman.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. But the defense is stout. The defense is exactly what you want it to be. But more importantly, the offense seemed to find its legs.
I also want to see a minute more sample size on Missouri because this is a team that almost lost to Vanderbilt. And now they get blown out by Texas A&M, and we've kind of projected.
We're gonna loop it back and talk about Missouri here in a second. But no, you're exactly right. You're exactly right.
There's a world in which this doesn't look as good of a win as it does right now.
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is a Missouri team that also has a road trip to Alabama coming up here in a couple of weeks, and that's going to be a critical matchup for them as well. But let's just transition. Let's just fully switch over to Eli Drinkwitz's squad. they got blasted in this game. And you pointed to some officiating moments with snafus where things fall out. You got to be mentally stronger than that in the SEC. You just have
totally
to.
agree.
You,
Absolutely agree.
You cannot let little instances like that snowball. I've
Yeah.
seen teams snowball before. You saw
It's
Georgia
exactly
snowball
what happened.
against Alabama. And you let one mistake turn into 5, and you cannot possibly do that. And especially in a ranked matchup in the SEC, especially on the road. Your offense was dog water. It was terrible. Brady Cook was sacked 6 times. He struggles. He was 13 of 31 for a $186. Dude, you have a Biletnikoff winner at wide receiver. That's unacceptable. Your offensive line was pegged to be one of the best in the SEC. Unacceptable. Even more so is the fact that you look in that backfield and Nate Noel only gets 30 yards in this game. Again, unacceptable. But I mean, I get it to the point where you are just getting railroad blasted in this game to the point where you're not able to run the ball. You have to drop back. And that's why Brady Cook is sacked so many times, is because they can pin their ears back and just get after it. So I understand that side of it. But it's more just the fact that they lost their composure and it got ugly. Like we talked about that happening to Georgia earlier this season, but the difference was Georgia, in a raucous road environment in a critical game, they turned around and found an answer. They did something and turned it around. That never came from Missouri. And at no point in this game did I ever feel confident that Missouri was going to find any level of success in this game. They lost their heads. And maybe it's a one-off. Maybe it's one of those games where sometimes you just you review the tape, you move on to next week. And sometimes teams are better for these types of results, but I'm a little concerned because they got blasted in this game, in a game that they were really supposed to win. And you're also doing it on the heels of some kind of lackluster performances as it was. I mean, you have the 2 games to start the season where you don't allow a single touchdown, but those are to teams that probably shouldn't be scoring touchdowns against their regular competition, much less Missouri. Then you go on and you beat Boston College at home in a game that you probably should have lost, a team that's now since faltered a good bit. Then you you win, I should say lose, but you have the double overtime win over Vanderbilt. And then this is your next showing out of the bye week. At what point, Missouri, you may not be in that second tier. You might be dropping down into that third tier. You might be closer to that than you are that first tier, which this was supposed to be the game where you establish yourself. And that was the furthest thing from what happened.
Yeah, I just, we're going to find out about Ole Miss as we get into it as well, but we're going to find out about Missouri, just where they really situate themselves. And for them, it's going to be a tough road back because of the schedule, as you mentioned, dealing with Alabama, dealing with Oklahoma, and some of these other games. You're right. They let this one snowball, and not necessarily that it will matter ultimately, but if I'm an NFL scout, like, not a great look for Luther Burden either. The way he approached this game after that call.
Yeah, the team seemed like it fell asleep and kind of let this game go by the wayside. You get Massachusetts next, and then you're right back into that SEC schedule, which is no days off like we've seen so far in this one. Let's move. Let's keep it in the SEC. Lots of crazy SEC games here. The Georgia Bulldogs get right after losing their first game in 4 years. They bounce back and they get a win over Auburn in kind of a sleepy game. This was a very hot day in Athens, and it seemed like a lot of the fans seemed to think that too, because they ended up leaving around the 4th quarter. And it was also another slow start for the Dogs. I was kind of expecting this team to really come out strong, and they only lead 7-3 at the end of the 1st quarter. It was 14-3 at halftime, and Auburn ends up scoring with Jarquez Hunter to cut this lead to 14-10. And that's where you really saw Georgia kind of start leaning into this game. And that's maybe just the identity of this Georgia team. I mean, maybe they're a kind of team that needs a little time to ramp up a little bit and lean on their opponent. That's just kind of their identity as of right now. But I did find a positive with the rushing attack. The rushing attack did start finding its legs a little bit. Trevor Etienne scores twice. He rushes for 88 yards, and Carson Beck looked steady. Just your typical quarterback under center. He's 23, 29, 240 yards, 2 touchdowns. Nothing sexy about this game, really. But I was expecting Georgia to come out and kind of lean into it a little bit better. And they stretched out the scoreline a little bit at the end of this game, specifically in that fourth quarter. But I don't know. I just kind of a sleepy game, just in general.
Yeah, I mean, two things jump out at me. And look, you better hope it's not what you said, where that's what they need and they start to lean on their opponent, all that crap, because that's not how you win national championships. Kirby wanted this team to get off to a fast start. They did not get off to a fast start. Auburn has been liable to turn the ball over all season long. Guess what they didn't do? Force a single turnover. They have got to get better in those two areas specifically for this to be a Georgia team that can find their peak. They have got to force turnovers. They created a little bit of pressure. They got 3 sacks, but they have got to do more to get turnovers, and they have got to start faster. Those are the big time plays, the impact defensive moments that are going to impact these games. I'm comfortable with what Georgia did offensively. Defensively, not quite as much, but they do still have to start faster. It's especially frustrating when it's now become a talking point. It's now become a trend. Kirby Smart in the interview with, the quick 45-second blurb right before the game starts says, we want to get off to a fast start, and it doesn't happen. That's a problem. And so they've still got a lot of things to figure out and to get right. It's a comfortable win. You're okay with the win. But look, this is still a game that was 7-3 until a couple of seconds before halftime. They have got to find a way to separate from their opponents.
Yeah, and I think there's too much explosion available on this offense for them to be this lackluster in that regard. Right. I mean, there's too much potential here, and I think this team just has, of all of the top teams right now, I think Georgia has the most room to improve. And to some extent, that should scare a lot of people in college football. Just because this team has a lot of room in that avenue. And I think once you get some guys back on that offensive line and some of these other dudes on the outside, like specifically Arian Smith, who has dropped a lot of passes here over the last last 2 weeks. I think that they can get better. I think Carson Beck is only going to improve as the season goes on. And Trevor Etienne, I mean, like once he starts rolling a little bit more on a consistent basis, then I think this offense is going to get better. But I think you also mentioned something that was a little concerning here. It was, I understand Jarquez Hunter is hard to bring down, but there were a lot of instances where Auburn would take a play and it would be a tackle for a loss, or maybe it would be a 1 or 2 yard gain. And then that would turn and stretch into 4 or 5 yards. They'd get a couple extra yards here and there. And that may not matter in the micro always, but over the course of a game, that extends drives. That keeps your defense out on the field. It beats you up a little bit, just a little bit more. And it seemed to happen a lot in this game. And it's not just in this game. We saw that happen against Alabama, where Jalen Milroe would get to the outside and Jalen Milroe would take a 3-4 yard play where he's just going to the sideline and then he finds that edge and he cuts up the field. Or something like that. It just takes 5 yards and turns into 8, 9, 10. Now, Peyton Thorne is not Jalen Milroe. That's very clear. But he did have a couple scampers where he was able to extend drives and start stressing the Georgia defense a little bit more than he probably should have. And that is a concern for this team right now. They aren't tackling at a high level, which is very obscure and strange for a Kirby Smart defense. But I do think that they have room to improve there. That's something that's going to get better, I think, as the season goes on. So that's why I say that. I mean, Georgia, you look down this schedule too, you have to be better in those areas. You have Mississippi State coming up next, but then it's Texas. You got Ole Miss later on in the schedule. You have a wounded animal in Tennessee. Like, look, there are games here. Haynes King caused you a lot of problems last year. This is a team that needs to be better. They just need to be more sound and fundamentally strong. And they're dropping passes. They're missing assignments and little things like that, which is just not typical for a Kirby Smart team. But then let's flip it over to the Auburn side. Are we sure that Hugh Freeze is the guy? I'm still in. I'm still on board with Hugh Freeze, right? He's lost, I think now 6 games in a row to Power 4 opponents. That's not great, and for a guy who's kind of dropping bombs on his players and blaming them, and that he averages 2 turnovers per game over his 82 games, but it's his players' fault that they turn the ball over. Uh, I don't know. I just maybe I'm
Look,
just kind of sour
I
on Hugh
think you
Freeze.
have this discussion with any coach that struggles after taking a high-profile program. He did not recruit Peyton Thorne or whoever else they have at
He did
quarterback.
recruit Peyton Thorne.
Did
Peyton
he?
Thorne was a transfer portal addition
Okay,
that
well, I
he
mean,
made.
he hadn't been given a chance to
I know
develop
what
him,
you
I
mean.
guess.
I know what you mean.
He's got not a 5-star. He's got the number 2 ranked dual threat quarterback coming into the program. I think you have to give it an opportunity
I
to
agree.
work in
I'm
a
not. I
couple
agree.
more of
I
his
agree.
players. That being
For the record.
so I'm not going to be too critical right now. That being said, like, to answer your question, no. Like, I if I was an Auburn fan, I wouldn't be confident that he's like on the way to rebuilding the program in this new SEC where you're going to have to face a couple of different and newer teams, sometimes tougher teams, but you also may get to face some of the weaker teams more often as well. No, I wouldn't say I'm overly confident, but I do think he deserves the benefit of getting a lot more of his players into the program.
He does, and he will, and I'm going to give him that time.
Yeah.
But Auburn has continued to struggle, and they're losing games that they shouldn't be losing this year. I fully expected them to be a potential 7-8 win team this year, and it's just been anything but. Um, they've dropped games, and I felt like I never really felt like they had an opportunity to win this game. Really win this game. I thought that they had a chance to make it a better game. And then you have Peyton Thorne who misreads an RPO or an option type of situation where he could have handed the ball off and he was probably supposed to, but then he keeps the ball and is tackled for a loss. I mean, you're down 14-10 at that point, and then if you extend the drive there, that was basically all she wrote for Auburn at that point. But I mean, I know, like, did you ever really think that Auburn had a chance to win this game at any point?
No.
No. See, I didn't either. When I was reading up on this game, and I always read recaps, I read them in probably 100 different places after these games. It's just something I do. And then I watch the game myself, obviously. But a lot of them started talking as if like this was like some sort of an upset bid that Georgia took away. I just didn't see it that way. I didn't really see it that way. And Auburn has just been a bit of a disappointment throughout the course of this season.
Well, it's an upset bid in terms of, I mean, like I said, you scored with like a minute before halftime. It was 7-3 and anything can happen at that point. But yeah, I mean, once it got to 14-3, it felt safe.
Yeah. Well, they've lost now 3 games in a row. They got to get back on the right track, but they get the week off and then they get up to Missouri, a road trip there. And then it's Kentucky, Vanderbilt, which has shown that they're not any kind of a slouch. I'm looking at this team and I'm struggling to think of them as a bowl team. That's more what I was talking about with the Hugh Freeze commentary. You probably should have beaten Cal. You didn't do it. You probably should have beaten Arkansas. You didn't do it. You probably should have beaten Oklahoma and you didn't do it. Now the schedule gets tough and it's starting to become a little bit more important than ever to get a positive result. But they have the bye week this week. Couldn't have come at a better time. They can hit the reset button. They can settle in a little bit. All right. We'll do some quick hitters here. Starting with Ohio State. The Buckeyes handled Iowa. I don't really have a lot to say about this one in general, except for the fact that Iowa just once again shows that they do not belong on the same football field with the Buckeyes. They lose this game that trounced 35-7. This game was never really in doubt. And they did the exact thing that I said that would have been a nightmare scenario for them. Ohio State scored early. They got out to a quick start, and Iowa just doesn't have an answer if that's the case. Caleb Johnson was solid in this game. It's not spectacular. The Ohio State defense is able to soundly keep him contained. 86 yards for him and a touchdown here. Cade McNamara just again proves he's not the guy to really light anybody up. 98 yards. That's it. 98 yards. 4.5, 5 yards. Yards per completion, and he does have the interception. Just an utter trouncing by Ohio State and a big result for them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this for Cade McNamara. He was actually pretty efficient. They don't have anyone that's stretching the field. I don't know if 98 yards is his fault. There's no one getting down there, but that's neither here nor there. Ohio State's going to have the same problem that Georgia's having, and that is that they're starting slow. This was 7-0 at halftime, and obviously Ohio State turned it on. And the one thing that they do that Georgia maybe hasn't shown yet is when they turn it on, they can really go. And they scored 3 touchdowns in that third quarter coming out of halftime. But they started slow as well. So you'd like to see them get going a little bit. A couple of turnovers they had as well, a couple of fumbles lost that didn't help their cause. But they can get after it once they turn it on, and obviously we'll find out everything we need to know in week 7, and you and I will be talking about that game in our midweek show when we come back and preview all the big games of week 7, and certainly Ohio State will be largely in the center of that talk.
Yeah, and when I say they got a fast start, that's really what I was trying to say.
No, I know what you meant, and they did get out
able to pour it on quickly.
Yeah.
So it's the fact they come in and they score immediately, and then it was after that it was they can turn it on, and then once they turn it on, it's over. But that's what I just wanted to clarify to make sure that I was not misconstrued there. But look, Ohio State's got a lot of strengths. Ohio State's really good on defense. They're really good. They're even better on offense. And when they're completing, or they're staying on the field like they are, they're sustaining drives. They're 7 of 11 on third down. They control the ball for much of the game. The defense holds the opposing offense's strength in check. Hard to beat them. It's really hard to beat them, but it's also hard to know who they really are until they face Oregon. I'm not going to have a lot of full picture understandings of who Ohio State is until they start playing those bigger marquee matchups. And I will reserve my judgment of them until we get to that stage. But we'll keep it up here in the Big Ten. The Michigan Wolverines, 17 points, not enough. 27 to 17. That's a typo in here. Washington, they avenge last season's national championship, and they handle the Wolverines of Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, look, Michigan turns to their third quarterback of the season at one point in this game as Jack Tuttle, who's been kind of all over the place, started finally tossing the ball around a little bit. Looked like maybe they're going to have some semblance of a passing offense. That went away relatively quickly. Washington did a great job on Khalil Mullings, who's had just big play after big play after big play for Michigan over the course of the season. They limited him. They did let Donovan Edwards go off at one point, but Washington just stayed steady. They didn't feel like this game was ever out of reach or in danger, out of hand. And they just kept knocking at it. And when Michigan's offense started to slow down, theirs picked up a little bit, enough to get the job done. Nothing overly impressive from either team. Obviously, and this is no surprise here, Garrett, Michigan is not one of the 10 best teams in the country. A team that limited in the past game is never going to be. Not since we got rid of the triple option at big time level of football. It's just not realistic anymore. So, look, this was a top 10 team similar to Missouri, who was going on the road. That was actually an underdog. And so Washington took care of business. Michigan's got to figure out that quarterback still.
Yeah. And look, this is a team that thought they had an answer at quarterback. And then that's when Alex Orji came in there and was the starting quarterback. And he was the starter in this one. And then they had another slow start. And Jack Tuttle comes in. And he turns it over twice in the final 10 minutes.
Yeah, they were killers.
Yeah. And that's just really what happened to him. But when Orji's in there, you're getting outgained 163-47 midway through the second quarter. That's unacceptable. Like, you can't be that one-dimensional. If you only run the ball, eventually teams are going to key up on it and dominate you. Tuttle does give them a little bit more of a downfield threat, and you guys have some not you guys, but I'm saying they have some guys in the backfield that can, run the ball and be effective. You don't need the mobile quarterback necessarily, but he does kind of give you another dimension back there. But Jack Tuttle, you need to be able to stretch the ball. You have to.
Yeah.
And you saw what sort of a difference it made when Will Rogers was able to drop back and just pick the defense apart. He was heroic in this game. He had a fantastic game. And this was a game of runs too. And Washington sustained the Michigan run because you have a guy like Will Rogers under center. He has two first half touchdowns, but then led 3 fourth quarter scoring drives. They're steady. When you have a veteran under center like that, it's awesome. And then it's especially important for a first year head coach at Washington and Jed Fish. This is his first big win since coming over from Arizona. And another one note that I do want to highlight, Michigan's 24-game Big Ten regular season winning streak was snapped in this game. Huge run there for Michigan. 24 games in a row is pretty spectacular. But all good things, they must come to an end, and it does here for the Wolverines. Any more thoughts on this one?
I'm in line with you. I think you got to really seriously consider Tuttle your QB1 moving forward. You have to have a downfield threat to compete.
Mm-hmm. Another Big Ten matchup that did not go the way that a lot of people expected. USC falls in their second Big Ten road test against Minnesota 24-17. They lose in this one. Now, they're not 0-2 in these Big Ten games on the road. Defense has been better. Still got some holes that they have to patch up. It was never going to be a one-year fix. It was never going to all get figured out. But I have more concerns specifically on the offense. This is a group that was held in check. Minnesota has the FBS's leading secondary. They've allowed the fewest yards per game to opposing offenses, and showed Miller Moss was held to just 200 yards passing, and this team ties for the lowest score in 3 seasons under Lincoln Riley. Woody Marks does have a good performance on the ground. The running back, he gets 134 yards and a touchdown, but this offense was not good enough when it needed to be, and the defense was not good enough when it needed to be, and that's really what it comes down to. But I do have one situational thing that I'm asking you about, but I'm going to turn it over to you.
You may as well ask me now before. Yeah, you may as well ask it now before I go into my diatribe here.
Oh, there you go. Minnesota had an interesting decision to make.
Yeah, we were spared of one of the all-time great coaching blunders is what happened.
Yeah, Max Brosmer, he scored it with 56 seconds left. The important thing to remember is that was 4th and 1.
Yeah.
On the 1 yard line.
Kick the damn field goal. What are you doing?
1st and 1 and 2nd and 1 and 3rd and 1. And you go right back to the well and you're like, let's just do this. This is great. And fortunately for Minnesota, he does score at that time. But oh my God, if he doesn't score that touchdown, we're talking about this as being a really big coaching blunder.
Yeah, it would have been in the discussion with one of the all-time mismanaged plays in the history of Minnesota football, of Big Ten football, of college football. Like this is a tie game at the moment, and I understand the desire to score and make them score so that they can only tie. You said worst case scenario, you go to overtime, and I get even the premise of like, well, if we don't score, they've got 50-something seconds and they're all the way at their own half-yard line. But, like, bro, you got to take a lead. Like, what are you doing? Now, and it was close. It went to replay, and I guess they determined he got over the line. But initially, they didn't think he did, and then replay shows he did. But even that is, like, the slimmest of margins that he got in.
Yep.
I don't really know what to say on this. It's tough to criticize because you do win. Maybe it plays out where if you kick a field goal, you do lose because you're resetting the field position and field goal tie, but they could have to win. To me, though, and I agree with you, like this was one of the all-time blunders if Minnesota doesn't get in the end zone. There's no doubt about that. I hate to say this for the second time in this podcast, Garrett. You are 1st and goal at the 4 if you're USC defensively. 1st and goal at the 4 with 1:58 left. How are you not letting them score immediately? Now, it almost worked out, right? Hypothetically, you held them and they had to go all the way to 4th down, and even that, you almost stopped them. Like, maybe there was another set of circumstances where you somehow hold them out of the end zone. But, like, again, I would so much rather have 1:58 knowing my offense needs a touchdown than 57 seconds knowing we need a field goal to tie and touchdown to win. And again, ultimately what happened? Same thing that happened with Tennessee. The offense got sped up. They made a mistake because they didn't have enough time with no timeouts to drive up the field. You would have had 1:58, 2 of your 3 timeouts remaining for your offense to go score. What happened? Millimos had to force passes because you were out of time. I just, when it gets to 1st and goal from the 4-yard line, it just maybe I'm just like in this weird defeatist mindset, but like feels like you should just let them score, take what time you have left, and see if you can mount a defense. That's the way I would have played it.
Yeah, and look, this seems to be a very common theme in college football right now where coaches just don't want to kick field goals. And I guess the analytics say one thing, and you got to go for touchdowns, and touchdowns win games. And I get that fact, but sometimes you just got to get points, man. And
Yeah.
we saw this yesterday in the Duke Georgia Tech game where Manny Diaz, the Duke head coach, had a chance to cut into the lead, and it was like 4th and like 8 or something like that. Just kick the damn field goal. Just kick the damn field goal. You need the points anyway. And then he goes for it on 4th down, doesn't get it, and Georgia Tech got the ball back and were able to kind of run down the field and do whatever they needed to. But interesting. It's just an interesting decision. It ends up working out well for them.
I can't tell you how much
row the boat.
I can't tell you how much I wish he hadn't gotten in. Like, I so much more wanted the reaction to that aspect of this game than, and it's a nice win for Minnesota and good upset. And now there's a lot of questions, USC, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. Man, I would have loved the press conference. I would have loved the reaction if they failed and ultimately had lost that game. That's just me being hopeful for entertainment.
for that side of it.
Yeah.
It's very interesting indeed. I want to ask you this question too. This isn't on our show sheet, but it's something that just popped into my head. USC's now lost a second game. Michigan's now lost a second game.
Yeah.
Who is in that upper echelon now of not just, I understand it's Ohio State and Oregon. Those are your top 2 guys in the Big Ten right now. And I don't think there's anybody that can run with them. But then you got Indiana, and then you have Penn State, and then it's somebody with a loss all the way down. Those are your undefeated teams. You have 4 teams that are undefeated. Is there a team, Penn State, Indiana specifically, that can run with an Oregon or Ohio State?
I haven't seen enough from Indiana, and I hate to cop out. Obviously, that's my alma mater, and I think there's some real chances they could go. My goodness, I mean, 10-2, 11-1 this season based on their schedule, but I just haven't seen them. I know they're good enough offensively. I just don't know if their defense will hold up against some of these better teams. Penn State would be the answer, though, and it's the same response, though. I haven't seen them enough, but again, I think we'll find out this coming week, and we'll talk about that on Thursday. But they'll have an opportunity to impress us coming up.
But I ask you that because I very seriously. I guess the SEC really did help out the Big Ten this week just with some of their results on the field. But I wonder how many teams the Big Ten is going to end up getting in this playoff field.
Probably 2, outside chance of 3. It'd be very tough for it to be 4.
I still see 3. I still say 3 is probably your number.
Indiana has to not lose any games they shouldn't lose.
And then Penn State needs to look good. And then those are your 3 teams. All right. So we're kind of on the same page. Last game here, an Ole Miss game, or Ole Miss team that doesn't really look super crisp in this one, but I actually kind of liked it. It's the fact that you're really banged up. You're down one of your best defensive players, and you're also down Trey Harris, and you still find a way to get a win on the road in the SEC. This was a team that I think was reeling a little bit after the loss last week. And Jackson Dart wasn't super awesome in this game, 285 yards, but he was 14-27, so around 50% completion percentage. Doesn't have a touchdown pass in this game. Also, Trey Harris gets hurt in this game. I mean, not the prettiest of games, but it's a game that you need to win. And something that I've always felt was lacking specifically with this Ole Miss team under Lane Kiffin is that oftentimes if the going got really kind of sketchy or tough, that's when they would fold. And they weren't really a mentally strong team, but they come out and they responded in a big way that I really liked. You jump out to a 24-3 lead, and the game was never really in doubt after that fact.
No, I mean, look, Ole Miss probably goes on to win this game anyways. So like, whatever, but like South Carolina made it so easy when they went for it on 4th down from their own 35-yard line. Like, they didn't get it, and Ole Miss goes 34 yards in 4 plays, 5 plays, whatever it was, and immediately get a touchdown. The very next possession, South Carolina fumbles at midfield with the backup quarterback Robbie Ashford trying to scramble. They just made it too easy. And like you said, it's 24-3 at halftime, and I stopped paying attention. I guess they added a field goal from there. But, just South Carolina's thing is they need to make it difficult. Like I think we've seen that over the course of their season. They need to make it difficult for teams, and they made it easy for Ole Miss, and Ole Miss certainly good enough to take advantage.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, it's like you have a three-play drive, 3-and-out to start the game. Why are you going for it on 4th down on your opening possession at the 36-yard line?
Yeah, when you get the stop, I have no
Like,
idea.
what are you doing?
Yeah, no, you're making it way too easy.
Yeah,
You're making it way too easy.
So this is how it goes. You turn 3-and-out, subsequent turnover on downs. You fumble after 3 plays. You punt after 3 plays. And then you have a 10-play drive. Great, goes 33 yards and it's a turnover on downs.
Yeah.
You don't give yourself a chance. You don't
No.
give yourself a chance in this game. And ultimately, I think this says more about Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss is they rallied and responded in a way that I wanted to see them do. The loss to Kentucky, they didn't let them beat them twice, and I think that was the most important thing, especially now that you have the tough sledding of your schedule coming up. You have the trip to LSU, then you have Oklahoma, Arkansas, which just beat Tennessee, and then you get Georgia. So this is not a super easy little stretch of games here. This was the part of the season that they couldn't afford to lose, and they lost last week. I wanted to see the way they responded, and they responded in a very good way, and I'm really impressed with what I saw. But let's finish up here. Abe, how about your Week 6 shout-outs, man? I'll let you go first.
Shoot. Before we get to a shout-out, just Florida State Clemson as well. I just want to mention that game. Clemson wins 29-13. But Florida State looked a little bit better offensively with Brock Glenn as the passer. He still threw an interception. They couldn't run the ball, though, on Clemson, and we've talked about it for a while. That Clemson front has been outstanding. We did see Clemson start to slow down a little offensively from what we have seen them be. The 29 came on a very, very late score. It was 23-13 for a good portion of this game. And but just mention that. But going ahead and moving on to my shout outs. We already kind of mentioned Indiana moving to 6-0 for first time in however long it's been. I want to mention SMU out of the ACC. They moved to 5-1 with a road win at Louisville. Their only loss this year was a late field goal to BYU. He's now ranked in the top 15. SMU might be a team we need to discuss a little bit moving forward in the ACC. I don't want to overlook them, and I know we kind of joked about them coming in, and if you remember, like that was a game with SMU that I was really excited about, maybe I kind of put them in the rearview mirror, but I don't want to overlook them.
No, and speaking of SMU, they just jumped up into the top 25 at number 25, and I think they're a team to watch. I mean, look, we didn't joke about them. I thought we both, with Rhett Lashley's squad, that's a team that's really very seriously playing its way up into the ACC. They control their destiny as it stands right now. But I do want to shout out this AP poll because Texas gets 52 first-place votes. They are the number 1 team in the land. Ohio State, courtesy of their 5th straight meh game, they get 9 votes. But specifically, it's the fact that the SEC bookends the top 5, but it's 3 Big Ten teams that live in there. Penn State is number 4. Oregon's number 3. This is going to be a very interesting race. There are a lot of teams, and I think it's very top-heavy, obviously, like we expected. But how about Clemson coming in there? They're now the number 10 team in the country. They had fallen very, very far after their loss. I don't know if they were unranked necessarily, but they had dropped all the way to the bottom of the AP top 25 here.
They dropped 225.
I think they dropped 220. Yeah, that makes sense. And they have since climbed their way back. Oregon, they dropped all the way to 9. They have since climbed their way all the way back. Point is, it's a long season, folks. We're just 6 weeks in. So much can change. And we have Miami sitting in there at 6. You got Alabama at 7, Tennessee at 8. Lots of SEC teams. Do you know what that means? A lot of those teams have to play each other. A lot of those teams have to play each other, and it makes for some really compelling matchups down the stretch. So even more reason to follow, like the podcast, subscribe, follow along all season long. We do this twice a week. We got our previews coming up later on this week, and we got another crazy one coming up. Maybe not quite as crazy as what we saw this week, but honestly, you never know. because this is college football and this is why we love it so much. For Abe Gordon, my name is Garrett Chapman. This is the College Football Overtime Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you again right here on Thursday. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, follow along all season long. We will see you again very soon. Thanks so much for listening.